Before you scroll, pause for a second, because if you leave now, you will stay exactly where you are. Same thoughts, same habits, same quiet frustration you don't talk about. Most people won't admit this, but deep down they know something is off. They are busy but not fulfilled, informed but not transformed, motivated in short bursts, then right back to the same loop. And here's the uncomfortable part. It's not because you're incapable. It's because no one ever told you the truth without softening it. What you're about to hear isn't designed to make you feel good. It's designed to make you wake up. Somewhere along the way, you were taught to wait. Wait for confidence, wait for clarity, wait for the right moment, the right support, the right version of yourself. But what if waiting is the thing that's quietly stealing your life? What if the fear you feel isn't a warning, but an invitation? What if the discomfort you avoid is the exact doorway you need to walk through? What if the reason nothing has changed is because you've been negotiating with your potential instead of committing to it? This video is not about motivation. Motivation fades, you already know that. This is about something deeper, something heavier, something that doesn't leave when the excitement does. If you stay until the end, you won't just understand why you're stuck. You'll understand what it actually takes to move forward, without hype, without illusions, without excuses. But once you hear it, you won't be able to unhear it, so decide carefully, because this isn't content you consume, it's a line you cross. Let's talk about execution, because this is where most people quietly disappear from their own lives. You can be intelligent. You can see patterns others don't. You can understand systems, strategy, and potential outcomes better than almost anyone in the room. None of that guarantees anything. Intelligence is a tool, not a result. Potential is not a currency the world accepts. The world only accepts proof. And proof only comes from doing the work repeatedly in the real world, where things break. Most people live in their heads. They simulate success instead of building it. They think through scenarios, optimize ideas, wait for clarity, wait for confidence, wait for conditions to be perfect. But clarity is not something you wait for. Clarity is a byproduct of motion. You don't think your way into action. You act your way into understanding. Execution is where fantasy meets physics. Ideas are infinite. Reality is constrained. And that's exactly why execution matters. When you actually try to build something, you collide with limits. Time, money, energy, human behavior, your own psychology. Those collisions are not failures, they are data. And data is what allows progress. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People who talk the most about ideas usually execute the least. Not because they're lazy, but because talking feels productive without being risky. Execution is exposure. The moment you act, you can be wrong. You can look foolish, you can fail publicly. Your identity gets involved. Your ego gets threatened. So the mind does something clever. It convinces you that thinking, planning, learning, and preparing are enough for now. That tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow is a myth we use to protect ourselves from discomfort. The difference between people who build and people who don't is not intelligence. It's tolerance for discomfort and ambiguity. Builders move forward without complete information. They accept that their first version will be wrong. They don't need certainty to begin. They understand that precision comes later, speed comes first. Execution also changes how your brain works. When you act, feedback loops tighten. You stop guessing and start observing. You learn faster because reality teaches faster than theory ever could. You develop judgment, not just knowledge. Judgment is what allows you to make good decisions when the rule book runs out, which it always does. There's also a deeper psychological shift that happens when you execute. You stop identifying as someone who wants to do things and start identifying as someone who does things. That identity compounds. Each action reinforces the next. Momentum builds. Confidence stops being something you wait for and becomes something you generate. People underestimate how powerful this shift is. Once you cross that line, excuses stop sounding convincing even to yourself. You see through them. You realize how many reasons you used to invent just to avoid starting. You also realize something liberating. Perfection was never required. Progress was. Execution is also a form of respect. Respect for your own ideas. Respect for your time on this planet. An idea that never leaves your mind is indistinguishable from an idea that never existed. If you believe something matters, you owe it the effort to test it in reality. Otherwise, it's just intellectual decoration. There's a reason the world remembers builders, not thinkers alone. Thinking is necessary, but it's not sufficient. The people who change things are the ones willing to shoulder the weight of implementation. They take responsibility for outcomes, not just intentions. They accept that if something fails, it's on them to fix it, not explain it away. And yes, execution is messy. It's inefficient. It rarely follows a straight line. You will waste effort. You will make decisions that look obvious in hindsight and painfully unclear in the moment. That's not a flaw in the process. That is the process. Waiting to feel ready is one of the most sophisticated forms of procrastination. Readiness is a moving target. The moment you reach it, the goal shifts. The people who make progress understand that readiness is not a prerequisite. Commitment is. You commit, then you figure it out. This applies whether you're building a company, learning a skill, changing your life, or trying to solve a problem that actually matters. The scale doesn't change the principle. Execution compounds. Small actions taken consistently outperform grand plans that never leave the page. And here's the part most people miss: execution creates optionality. The more you do, the more paths open up. Action reveals opportunities that thinking alone cannot. Doors appear only after you start walking the hallway. From a distance, everything looks closed. So if you're stuck, don't ask yourself what you should think next. Ask yourself what you can do next. One concrete action. Something measurable. Something that forces feedback. That's how momentum starts. You don't need to know the whole path. You just need to take the next step honestly and then respond intelligently to what happens. That's not recklessness. That's how progress has always worked. Execution is not about being reckless or impulsive. It's about being real. It's about engaging with the world as it is, not as you wish it were. It's about accepting that meaning is not found in contemplation alone, but in contribution. So here's what I want you to sit with. If everything you know disappeared tomorrow, what could you still build with your hands, your time, and your effort? Because in the end, the gap between who you are and who you could be is not filled by ideas. It's filled by action. Let's be honest about pain, because this is where the fantasy usually breaks. Everyone says they want success, impact, meaning. Very few people pause to ask what that actually costs. Not in theory, but in lived experience, in hours, in energy, in stress, in the quiet trade-offs nobody applauds. Pain is not a side effect of doing meaningful things. Pain is the entry fee. If you expect the path to feel good most of the time, you are preparing for disappointment. Growth is inherently destabilizing. It pulls you out of patterns your nervous system has learned to depend on. Your brain is designed to keep you safe, not exceptional. So the moment you push beyond what's familiar, your mind sends alarms. Fear, fatigue, resistance. These are not signals that something is wrong. They are signals that something is changing. Most people misinterpret that signal. They assume discomfort means danger. So they retreat, they rationalize. They say things like, "This isn't the right time," or "This doesn't feel aligned," or "I need balance first." What they're really saying is, "I don't want to pay the price yet." And that choice is valid, but it has consequences. There is no version of a meaningful life that is painless. The only question is which pain you choose. The pain of discipline, or the pain of regret. The pain of effort now, or the pain of knowing you avoided your potential later. One of these hurts up front and fades. The other compounds quietly over time. Here's the paradox: pain is not the enemy of progress. Avoidance is. Pain, when approached correctly, becomes information. It tells you where the edge is. It shows you what you care about. It reveals weaknesses that need strengthening. When you stop treating pain as something to eliminate and start treating it as something to understand, your relationship with work, ambition, and failure fundamentally changes. People who achieve difficult things don't enjoy suffering. They're not wired differently. They've simply reframed it. They don't ask. They ask, "What is this discomfort asking of me?" Sometimes the answer is rest. Sometimes it's learning. Sometimes it's persistence. The key is discernment, not escape. Sacrifice is another word people like to romanticize without examining. Sacrifice is not about losing everything. It's about choosing deliberately. When you choose to build something meaningful, you are choosing to say no to other things. Comfort, convenience, certain social expectations, sometimes even relationships that cannot grow with you. That doesn't make you cold or obsessed. It makes you honest about trade-offs. What breaks people isn't sacrifice itself. It's unconscious sacrifice. Drifting into a life where you give up your time, energy, and attention without intention. That's exhausting. Purposeful sacrifice, on the other hand, is stabilizing. When you know why you're enduring something difficult, the difficulty becomes tolerable. Sometimes even energizing. There's also an identity shift that happens when you accept pain as part of the process. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs constant reassurance. You become someone who can carry weight. That changes how you move through the world. You don't panic as easily. You don't crumble at the first sign of resistance. You develop a kind of quiet confidence that isn't loud or performative. It's grounded. This matters because the problems worth solving are not polite. They push back. They resist simple answers. They demand persistence over long-time horizons. If you collapse under pressure, you self-select out before the work even gets interesting. Pain also strips away illusion. It reveals what you actually want, not what you say you want. When things get hard, motivation alone doesn't carry you. Values do. The moments where quitting feels rational are the moments where clarity is forged. You learn whether this is curiosity or commitment, whether this is a hobby or a responsibility. And yes, sometimes the cost is higher than expected. Sometimes the pressure is relentless. Sometimes progress is slow to the point of being invisible. That's where most people stop. Not because they can't continue, but because they don't see immediate validation. But meaningful work often operates on delayed feedback. You are planting seeds in conditions where growth is not immediately visible. That requires patience and trust in the process you chose. Avoiding pain doesn't lead to safety, it leads to stagnation. Stagnation is comfortable at first, then quietly corrosive. You start to feel restless, then resentful, then disconnected, not because life treated you unfairly, but because you didn't engage deeply enough to earn its rewards. There's a reason resilience is built, not inherited. Each time you endure something difficult without breaking, you expand your capacity. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once scared you becomes familiar. That's not numbness, that's strength. This doesn't mean glorifying burnout or ignoring limits. Intelligent endurance matters. The goal is not to suffer aimlessly. The goal is to suffer in service of something that justifies the cost. When the reason is clear, the pain becomes structured. It has direction. It becomes part of a narrative you can stand behind. If you want to do work that matters, you must make peace with discomfort. Not tolerate it reluctantly, but accept it as part of the architecture of progress. Every meaningful system has load-bearing components. Pain is one of them, so when it gets hard, don't ask why it hurts. Ask what kind of life would be worth this level of effort. Then decide accordingly. Let's talk about responsibility, because this is where motivation quietly steps aside and something far more durable takes its place. Motivation is seductive. It arrives in waves. It feels energizing. But motivation is also unreliable. It depends on mood, validation, novelty, the feeling that someone sees you. Responsibility does not. Responsibility stays when the excitement leaves. Responsibility doesn't ask how you feel today. It asks who you are willing to be, consistently over time. At some point, every meaningful path reaches a moment of emotional neutrality. The thrill fades. The external encouragement thins out. The question is no longer, do I feel inspired? The question becomes, am I willing to show up anyway? That is the quiet threshold between aspiration and authorship. Responsibility begins the moment you stop waiting to be chosen. Many people live as if life is a series of auditions. They wait for approval, permission, reassurance that their desire is valid. But a responsible stance toward your life says something different. It says, I choose myself and I accept the consequences of that choice. This is not about self-centeredness. It's about self-trust. When you take responsibility, you stop outsourcing your sense of direction. You recognize that while you cannot control outcomes, you are accountable for your participation, for your effort, for the integrity of your choices. Psychologically, this is a profound shift. It moves you from a passive relationship with your life to an active one. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You begin asking, what am I doing with what's happening? That question alone restores agency. Responsibility is often misunderstood as pressure or burden. But in reality, it's stabilizing. When you know that you are responsible for your choices, you stop wasting energy on resentment. You stop waiting for circumstances to change before you engage. You work with what is, not what you wish were different. There's also grief here. Taking responsibility means letting go of certain fantasies. The fantasy that someone else will fix it. The fantasy that the past will be undone. The fantasy that clarity will arrive before commitment. Responsibility asks you to mourn those illusions and step into something more grounded. This is especially difficult because responsibility removes a convenient escape. When things don't work out, you can no longer tell yourself a simple story where you are only the victim of circumstance. You have to look honestly at your own patterns. Where you hesitated, where you avoided discomfort, where you stayed silent instead of speaking. This self-examination is uncomfortable, but it is also how maturity is built. Responsibility doesn't mean blame. Blame is rigid and punishing. Responsibility is curious. It asks, what part of this belongs to me? And then it asks, what do I want to do differently next time? One collapses the future, the other opens it. In relationships, in work, in creativity, the same principle applies. Waiting to feel motivated is a form of dependency. It keeps you tethered to external conditions. Responsibility is relationally adult. It says, I am accountable for my side of the equation, even when the other side is imperfect. This is where courage enters quietly, not the dramatic kind, but the steady kind. The courage to keep your word to yourself. The courage to act without applause. The courage to tolerate uncertainty without rushing to soothe it away. When responsibility replaces motivation, your identity shifts again. You are no longer someone chasing a feeling. You are someone honoring a commitment. That commitment might be to a project, a value, a future version of yourself. The object matters less than the posture. And here's something subtle but important. Responsibility deepens meaning. Meaning is not found in constant excitement. Meaning comes from coherence, from knowing that your actions align with what you say matters to you. Even on days when the work feels ordinary or heavy, there is also dignity and responsibility, a sense of self-respect that comes from knowing you did not abandon yourself when things became difficult. This kind of dignity is quiet, it doesn't announce itself, but it sustains you when external validation disappears. Many people fear responsibility because they associate it with loss of freedom. But responsibility doesn't eliminate freedom, it defines it. When you take responsibility, you choose your constraints instead of inheriting them unconsciously. You decide what you will carry and why. This is especially important in a world that constantly invites distraction and deferral. It's easy to stay busy and still avoid responsibility. Easy to consume insight without integrating it. Easy to talk about change without embodying it. Responsibility asks you to slow down enough to be honest. It asks you to notice where you are waiting for motivation as a way to delay commitment. It asks you to recognize where you already know what needs to be done, but are hoping for a better emotional moment to do it. That moment may never come. And that's not a failure of feeling. It's an invitation to act from values instead of moods. Responsibility also reconnects you to time. Not the urgency of deadlines, but the continuity of your life. It reminds you that who you become is shaped less by dramatic decisions and more by repeated small ones. What you choose to do when no one is watching. What you return to after disappointment. What you sustain after novelty wears off. When you accept responsibility, you stop asking life to be easier and start asking yourself to be sturdier. Not harder, not colder, just more rooted. And something unexpected happens then. Motivation returns, but differently, quieter. Less performative. It comes not from excitement, but from alignment. From the sense that you are living in agreement with yourself. So if you are waiting to feel ready, inspired, or certain, notice that waiting itself is a choice. You can choose differently, because responsibility doesn't ask for perfection, it asks for presence.